Okay, in this first lesson, we're going to take just a few minutes to really just kind of explain the basic purpose of the node editor. So for this example, I have this very simple object here. This is really just a polygon cube. If we select this and take a look over inside the inputs or underneath the history, you can see where I've gone through the process of adding a few polygon extrusions. So starting with this initial polygon cube and extruding up, extruding out, to make just this slightly different shape. And if you take a look, my final command here was to apply just a basic polygon texture projection on here, so that way I could get any textures to fit on here properly with the UVs. Now, if I wanted to access these inputs in a little bit more of a graphical layout, what I would normally have to do inside of Maya is access the hypershade, or the hypergraph in this case. So to access the hypergraph, I can select my object, go up to Window, and down to the hypergraph. Let's take a look at the connections in this case. Okay, so this pulls open my hypergraph window, where now we can see all of these same inputs that we have listed over here, but now laid out in a little bit more of a graphical format, and you can start to see exactly which nodes are feeding into each other and the order and the direction that those are going. We can also start to make and break connections here in a little bit more of a graphical way. Okay, so that's one area of Maya, but this is still not the complete picture. Now, if I wanted to access things like materials and textures on this object, we would have to access the hypershade. So to access the hypershade, I'll just go up to Window, Rendering Editor, and down to Hypershade. Okay, and this is where we can start to see all the different materials that are in my scene. If we select a material and just come up here and graph the input and output connections, we can start to see textures and any supplemental nodes that make up that material. But again, there's still even more functionality beyond this. Now, if I wanted to take, let's say, any of these two nodes and make a really advanced connection between those, let's say I just come in here, middle click this texture onto this material, and let's go down to this other connection. This pulls open what's called the connection editor, and you can see that this allows us to access some really deep level attributes, and we can connect just about any attribute to any other attribute of any other node. So this is where we can start to make some really advanced deep level connections. Now, if you're working in a project that requires the use of all three of these windows, you can start to see, and you've probably experienced, where working back and forth and jumping through all of these different editors and windows can start to become a little bit more of a pain, and sometimes a little bit more confusing than it needs to be. So this is really where the node editor comes in. So the node editor in Maya really takes the functionality of the connection editor, the hypershade, and the hypergraph, and essentially combines those all into one simple editor. Now, I do want to point out that this node editor that I'm about to show you is something that was introduced in Maya 2013. So if you're using anything older than Maya 2013, you won't have this functionality that I'm about to show you. So again, sort of keeping in mind what we see here at these three different editors. Now, if we go up to Window and down to the node editor, we can start to come in here and start to see this in a little bit more graphical way. So rather than closing out all these windows, let me just go back and select my cube through the outliner. Okay, so it's selected over here. And now with that cube selected, I can come in here and graph that connection. Okay, so in here we can start to see something very similar to what we had up here in the hypergraph. But now in this node editor, we can see all these different connections. We can actually come in here and start to expand all of these different nodes and start to access pretty much everything found in here. This is all very similar to the sort of functionality that we would get with the connection editor. And in addition to that, we can start to access materials and textures and things like that. So you can start to see really quickly where if you're in a situation where you need a combination of very high level of control combined with lots and lots of different connections that you need to make, this node editor is going to start to become a very good friend of yours, for lack of a better word. Okay, So that's a quick look at this node editor, and really just sort of giving you a quick look at exactly what this node editor is designed to accomplish in sort of Maya's grand scheme of things. So now that we've had a chance to look at this and understand sort of what the basic purpose of this node editor is designed to be, what we'll start to do in the next several lessons is begin exploring the process of making connections and starting to graph your wanted nodes into this node editor.